Mark stood in the sterile, dimly lit hospital corridor, clutching a single bouquet of yellow tulips that looked far too bright for such a somber place. He was an exhausted single father, just trying to do one small thing right in a world that felt like it was constantly pushing back. He pushed open the heavy wooden door of room 412, expecting to see his old friend, but instead, he found someone he didn't recognize at all. A pale, fragile woman lay there, surrounded by expensive monitors but seemingly abandoned by the world. He had no idea that by placing those flowers on her bedside table, he wasn't just making a mistake. He was stepping into a secret world of immense wealth, bitter betrayal, and a life-changing connection that would rewrite his entire future. The mistake he made that afternoon was about to become the greatest miracle of his life, but first, it would lead him into a storm he never saw coming. The morning had started with the usual chaotic symphony of a single-parent household. Mark had burnt the toast, lost his daughter Lily's left shoe, and barely made it to the school gates before the bell rang. His life was a constant cycle of working long hours at the local garage and trying to be both mother and father to a 7-year-old who deserved the world. Money was tight, his back always ached, and his own needs had been pushed so far down the priority list they were practically invisible. When he heard that his old mentor, Mr. Henderson, had been admitted to the city hospital after a minor heart scare, Mark knew he had to visit. Mr. Henderson was the closest thing Mark had to a father figure, the man who taught him how to fix an engine and how to be a gentleman. Mark scraped together his last few pounds to buy a bunch of tulips, Mr. Henderson's favorite, and hurried to the hospital during his lunch break. He was flustered, checking his watch and worrying about the mounting pile of repairs waiting for him back at the shop. The hospital was a labyrinth of white walls and the smell of antiseptic. When he reached the 4th floor, he glanced at the room number scribbled on his hand. Room 412. He didn't notice that the ink had smudged, or that the nurse at the desk was too busy to look up. He pushed the door open softly, expecting to see the gruff, smiling face of his old boss. Instead, the room was silent, save for the rhythmic, lonely beep of a heart monitor. The woman in the bed looked like a ghost. She was thin, her skin almost translucent, and her silver hair was spread across the pillow like frayed silk. There were no cards on the window sill, no balloons, and no family members sitting in the plastic chairs. She looked utterly alone in a room that felt far too large for one person. Mark froze, realizing immediately that this wasn't Mr. Henderson. He should have turned around and walked out. He should have gone back to the nurse's station to find the correct room. But something about the absolute stillness of the woman stopped him. He thought about how it would feel to be lying there, staring at the ceiling, with no one coming to check on you. He thought about Lily, and how he hoped someone would show her kindness if she were ever in such a position. Without really thinking it through, he walked to the bedside table. He moved a plastic water pitcher aside and carefully placed the yellow tulips in a glass of water. He leaned over and whispered, "I think I'm in the wrong place, but these flowers look like they belong here more than they do with me. I hope you feel better soon." He didn't expect a response, but as he turned to leave, a thin, frail hand twitched on the white sheet. He paused, his heart thumping against his ribs. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to stay for just a moment. He pulled a chair closer and sat down. He didn't know her name, her story, or that she was Eleanor Vance, the matriarch of a multi-billion-pound shipping empire. To him, she was just a lonely soul in a cold room. He began to talk, softly and steadily. He talked about the weather, about the stubborn engine of the old Ford he was fixing, and about Lily's recent obsession with drawing space aliens. He spoke for 10 minutes, providing a bridge of human connection to a woman the world had seemingly forgotten. When he finally stood up to leave, he felt a strange sense of peace. He found Mr. Henderson in room 421, 2 doors down, and they had a laugh about Mark's poor navigation skills. Mark went back to work, his mind returning to the grind of bills and chores. He had no way of knowing that Eleanor Vance had been wide awake, listening to every single word he said. She had spent years surrounded by people who only wanted her signature on a check or her name in a will. She had spent a lifetime being a hidden billionaire, living a life of quiet luxury while her greedy relatives circled like vultures, waiting for her to pass. In Mark, she had heard something she hadn't heard in decades, a voice that wanted nothing from her. Over the next few days, Mark couldn't get the image of the lonely woman out of his head. He told himself he was too busy to go back, that he had enough problems of his own without adopting a stranger's loneliness. But every time he looked at Lily, he was reminded of the importance of kindness. He decided to visit again, just once, to see if she was still there. When he entered room 412 the second time, the tulips were still there, though they were beginning to wilt. This time, the woman's eyes were open. They were a piercing, intelligent blue, though they were clouded with fatigue. She didn't speak at first, just watched him as he walked in with a small, inexpensive paperback book he'd found at a charity shop. Mark felt a flush of embarrassment. He realized how strange he must look, a grease-stained mechanic visiting a woman he didn't know. He cleared his throat and offered a shy smile. "I didn't mean to intrude again," he said, "I just wanted to see if the flowers were still doing their job." To his surprise, the woman's voice was a low, melodic rasp. "They are the only things in this room that aren't trying to sell me something," she replied. Mark sat down, and for the next hour, they talked. Or rather, Mark talked and Eleanor listened. He didn't tell her he was struggling, but Eleanor was a sharp judge of character. She saw the worn soles of his boots and the way he checked his phone for messages from the babysitter. She saw a man who was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders but refused to let it crush his spirit. Mark found himself opening up to her in a way he couldn't with anyone else. She was a stranger, and there was a safety in that. He told her about his late wife, the woman who had been his high school sweetheart and the light of his life. He told her about the difficulty of explaining to a child why her mother wasn't coming home. Eleanor listened with a depth of attention that was almost unnerving. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, she shared small, cryptic pieces of her own life. She spoke of a grand house that felt like a prison and a family that treated love like a transaction. Mark assumed she was a retired teacher or perhaps a librarian, someone who had lived a quiet, modest life. He had no idea that while they spoke, her legal team was in the hallway, being held back by her strict instructions. Her nephews and cousins were furious. They had heard rumors of a common man visiting the great Eleanor Vance, and they were terrified he was a grifter trying to squeeze his way into the inheritance. Tension began to brew outside the room. A man named Julian, Eleanor's eldest nephew, was particularly incensed. Julian was a man who measured worth in stock options and designer suits. He viewed Mark as a threat to his future fortune. One afternoon, as Mark was leaving the room, Julian cornered him in the hallway. Julian was tall, polished, and radiated a cold arrogance. "I don't know what game you're playing," Julian hissed, his eyes scanning Mark's work uniform with disgust. "But stay away from my aunt. She's a vulnerable woman, and people like you are predictable. If you think you're getting a penny out of this, you're sadly mistaken." Mark was taken aback. He didn't even know the woman's last name, let alone that she had money. He felt a flash of anger, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm just visiting a friend," Mark said firmly. "I don't care about her money, and frankly, it's none of your business." Julian laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "We'll see about that. If I see you here again, I'll have security remove you." "Don't test me, grease monkey." Mark walked away, his face burning. He felt a deep sense of injustice. He wasn't there for money, he was there because Eleanor seemed like the only person in the world who actually listened to him. The conflict was escalating, and Mark was caught in the middle of a family war he didn't understand. He considered stopping the visits entirely. It wasn't worth the trouble, and he had Lily to think about. But then he remembered the way Eleanor's face lit up when he told her about Lily's school play. He realized that he wasn't just helping her, she was helping him. She gave him a sense of purpose beyond the daily grind. He decided he wouldn't let a man like Julian intimidate him. He would go back, not out of spite, but out of a genuine sense of loyalty to a woman who had become an unexpected anchor in his chaotic life. The atmosphere in the hospital changed over the following week. The quiet, sterile hallways felt charged with a hidden energy. Mark continued to visit Eleanor, but he was always looking over his shoulder, waiting for Julian or the hospital security to intervene. Eleanor seemed to grow stronger with each visit, as if Mark's stories of the real world were a form of medicine. She asked more questions about Lily, eventually suggesting that Mark bring her along. "I'd like to meet the girl who draws aliens," Eleanor said with a rare, genuine smile. Mark was hesitant. He didn't want Lily involved in the drama with Eleanor's family, but he also knew Lily would love the grandma in the hospital, as she had started calling her. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Mark arrived at the hospital with Lily in tow. She was wearing her favorite bright yellow raincoat and carrying a drawing she had made specifically for Eleanor. As they approached room 412, they found the door blocked by Julian and two other men in expensive suits. The tension was palpable. Julian looked like he was ready to explode. "I told you to stay away," Julian growled, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. "This has gone far enough. You brought a child? What is this, some kind of emotional blackmail?" Lily shrank back, clutching Mark's hand. Mark felt a surge of protective fury he hadn't felt in years. "She's a child, Julian." "Calm down," Mark said, his voice low and dangerous. "We are here to visit a friend. Now move out of the way." The confrontation escalated quickly. Julian reached out to grab Mark's arm, but Mark stepped back, shielding Lily. Just as the situation threatened to turn physical, the door to room 412 swung open. Eleanor Vance wasn't in her bed. She was standing in the doorway, supported by a sturdy walker, but her posture was regal and commanding. She looked at Julian with a coldness that seemed to drop the temperature in the hallway. "That is enough, Julian," she said, her voice no longer a rasp, but a sharp, authoritative blade. Julian froze, his face turning a pale shade of gray. "Aunt Eleanor, you should be resting. This man is a fraud, Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "This man is the only person who has visited me without a ledger in his hand. He is my guest. And this," she looked down at Lily, her expression softening instantly, "must be the artist." Lily cautiously stepped forward and handed Eleanor the drawing. It was a picture of a giant yellow tulip with a smiling face. Eleanor took it as if it were a priceless masterpiece. "It's beautiful, Lily. Thank you." She then turned back to Julian and his associates. "If any of you harass Mark or his daughter again, I will personally see to it that your allowances are severed and your positions in my companies are terminated. Am I clear?" Julian looked as if he'd been slapped. He stammered an apology and hurried away, his tail between his legs. Mark stood there, stunned. "Your companies?" he asked, the reality finally beginning to sink in. Eleanor looked at him, a mischievous glint in her blue eyes. "I suppose I should have mentioned that I own a fair portion of this city, Mark. But I wanted to see who you were without the shadow of my bank account hanging over us. You passed the test, though you didn't even know you were taking it." Mark felt a wave of confusion. He had been talking to one of the wealthiest women in the country as if she were a lonely pensioner. He felt a sudden urge to apologize, to walk away and return to his simple life. But Eleanor grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Don't you dare change how you look at me, Mark. I'm still the woman who likes your stories about broken engines. The only difference is that now, I can finally do something for the man who gave me hope when I thought I was finished." The revelation was a shock to the system, a major turning point that shifted the ground beneath Mark's feet. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, and she wasn't just a patient. They were bound by a secret that had been revealed in the heat of a hospital hallway confrontation. The weeks following the revelation were a blur of emotional highs and lows. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital, but she didn't return to a cold, empty mansion. Instead, she invited Mark and Lily to visit her at her estate on the outskirts of the city. Mark was hesitant. He felt like an intruder in a world of manicured lawns and gold-leafed ceilings. But Eleanor insisted. She had become a fixture in Lily's life, sending small gifts and calling every evening to hear about her school day. The emotional peak of their journey occurred during a quiet Sunday afternoon at the estate. Mark and Eleanor were sitting in a sun-drenched library that smelled of old leather and expensive wax. Lily was outside, playing with Eleanor's golden retriever in the vast gardens. Eleanor looked at Mark, her expression serious and deeply reflective. "Mark, I've spent my whole life building walls," she began. "I thought wealth was a shield, but it turned out to be a cage. My family only sees the shield. You were the first person in 40 years to look past it and see the woman inside." Mark looked down at his hands, which were still stained with the permanent grease of his trade. "I just saw someone who needed a friend, Eleanor. I know what it's like to feel like the world has moved on without you." Eleanor nodded, a tear glistening in the corner of her eye. "I know you do. And that's why I've made some decisions. My doctors tell me I don't have many years left." The illness in the hospital was a warning I can't ignore. The realization hit Mark like a physical blow. He had grown so fond of Eleanor that he hadn't let himself think about the fact that she was still fragile. He felt a deep sense of grief at the thought of losing her. Eleanor reached out and patted his hand. "Don't look like that. We aren't done yet. But I need to know that the things I've built will be used for good. Julian and the others, they don't understand the value of a single yellow tulip. They only understand the price." She explained that she had restructured her will. She wasn't just leaving Mark money, she was making him the head of a new charitable foundation aimed at supporting single parents in the city. She wanted him to have the resources to change lives, just as he had changed hers. Mark was overwhelmed. The consequences of his small act of kindness were staggering. He thought about the years of struggling to pay the rent, the nights he had gone hungry so Lily could have a full meal, and the constant fear of the future. Suddenly, that fear was gone, replaced by a massive responsibility. "I don't know if I can do this, Eleanor," he whispered. "I'm just a mechanic." Eleanor smiled, a bright, confident expression. "You're a man who gives his last flowers to a stranger. You're exactly the person this world needs. You have the heart for it, and the rest we can teach you." The emotional weight of the moment was profound. Mark realized that his life was being split into two parts, the before and the after. The realization that he could provide a secure, beautiful future for Lily was almost too much to bear. He walked to the window and watched his daughter laughing in the garden. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the money, but for the lesson Eleanor had taught him. He had learned that kindness isn't a transaction, it's a seed. You plant it without knowing if it will grow, and sometimes, it blooms into something that changes the entire landscape of your life. The consequences of that wrong hospital room were finally clear. It wasn't about a billionaire finding an heir, it was about two lonely people finding a family in the most unlikely of circumstances. The peak of their journey was this quiet understanding, that they had both been saved by a mistake. As the months passed, the transformation of Mark's life was complete, but his character remained unchanged. He still wore his old work jackets, though they were now clean and well-mended. He moved into a comfortable, modest house closer to Eleanor's estate so Lily could visit her grandmother every day. The charitable foundation flourished under Mark's grounded, empathetic leadership. He didn't sit in a high-rise office. He spent his time in the community, meeting with parents who were where he had been just a year before. He used Eleanor's resources to build childcare centers, provide emergency grants, and create a network of support that the city had desperately needed. The resolution of the story wasn't just about financial security, it was about the restoration of a family. Eleanor, invigorated by her new purpose and the presence of Mark and Lily, saw her health stabilize. She became the grandmother Lily never had, teaching her about history, art, and the importance of integrity. The greedy relatives, led by Julian, were largely sidelined. With the legal protections Eleanor had put in place, they were unable to interfere with her new life or the foundation. Julian eventually moved abroad, unable to face the common man who had taken the place he felt he deserved. The final closure came a year after that fateful day in the hospital. Mark decided to take Lily back to the hospital, not for a visit, but to deliver a gift. They walked down the familiar corridor to room 412. The room was currently empty, waiting for its next occupant. Mark placed a large, vibrant bouquet of yellow tulips on the bedside table. Beside it, he left a small, laminated card that read, "You are not alone. Someone is thinking of you." It was a simple gesture, a way to honor the moment that had changed everything. As they walked back to the car, Lily looked up at him. "Daddy, why did we leave flowers for nobody?" Mark smiled, picking her up and hugging her tight. "Because, Lily, sometimes the person who feels like nobody is actually the most important person in the world. We left them there so that when the next person enters that room, they know that someone cares." The lesson was clear, and it was one that Mark lived every day. He had learned that the world is a web of hidden connections, and a single act of selfless kindness can ripple out in ways we can never predict. He had entered the wrong room, but he had found the right life. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving, and he was helping others do the same. The story of the single dad and the hidden billionaire became a legend in the city, but to Mark, it was simply the story of how he found his way home. He realized that wealth isn't measured by what you have in the bank, but by the lives you touch and the love you leave behind. As the sun set over the city, Mark drove home, his heart full and his mind at peace. He knew that whatever challenges the future held, he wouldn't have to face them alone. He had a daughter who was growing up with a heart as big as his own, and a friend who had shown him that even in the darkest rooms, there is always a chance for light to break through. The resolution was perfect, the closure was complete, and the legacy of a single bunch of yellow tulips would live on for generations to come. Sometimes, life's biggest mistakes are actually our greatest opportunities in disguise. Mark walked into the wrong room, but he ended up exactly where he was meant to be. This story is a reminder that kindness costs nothing, yet its value can be beyond measure. You never know what someone else is going through, and a small gesture of warmth might be the very thing that saves them. So, the next time you have the chance to be kind, take it. You might just change a life. Or find that yours is the one being changed. Thank you for listening to this journey of the heart. If this story touched you, remember to share a little light with someone else today. Good night, and stay kind.